We are live, we can start.
Good evening. A warm welcome to you all. I am host Dr. Meenakshi Bhattacharjee, bring to you all yet another session from gender, session on gender and sexuality from Enagery. At the outset, I would like to tell you a little bit about Enagery for those of you all who are with us for the first time today. Enagery means love. It signifies unconditional love. And it is this bond of unconditional love for his native land that brought back Milind Datta, the founder of Enajuri from the US, to start a non-profit organization in 2018, which engages and promotes numerous initiatives that are striving for social changes, honing leadership skills and building entrepreneurship capabilities in the Northeast, including Assam, are to name a few. For the last 2 years, we have been engaging with speakers from various fields via virtual media to create a network among the people working in the region. Today, we are in conversation with Ayesha Mukherjee, and she's going to talk about empowering equality, navigating the transgender rights landscape under the 2019 Act. Ayesha Mukherjee is a dynamic PhD scholar at Himachal Pradesh National Law University, specializing in trans rights. With over 5 years as an assistant professor and a fervent advocate for change, Ayesha extends her impact beyond academia. She actively engages with the National Institute of Social Defense, conducting awareness sessions on Transgender Persons Act of 2019. Ayesha's commitment to fostering understanding in diverse communities is commendable. A published author in referred journals, Ayesha's research articles contribute to scholarly conversations and serve as beacon of knowledge in the ongoing pursuit of a more inclusive society. In the fight for trans rights, Ayesha Mukherjee stands as a beacon of knowledge, compassion, and advocacy, shaping a brighter, more equitable future for all. We welcome Ayesha for today, and we look forward to having a wonderful session with you. Over to you, Ayesha.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi, and rather for the rather illustrious introduction. And thank you for our highly esteemed guest and the Najori team who have joined with us today. And it's a matter of great privilege for me to be able to be instrumental in leading a change related to the domain of trans rights. And I have been engaged with the NISD for creating awareness sessions with respect to the Transgender Act 2019. And in this conversation, I'm going to pick out some of the very essential aspects of the Act that is very important with respect to human rights understanding as well as awareness. So I am just starting my presentation. And so before we start about introducing and the various provisions of the Act, it is pertinent to talk about the differences in concepts of gender, sex, and sexual orientation. There is a lot of confusion among the general public with respect to understanding of these terms, because these terms may appear to be same, but it is not the same. These terms mean very different things. So when we are talking about sex, gender, and sexual orientation, we have to understand that these things are not binary in nature. Sex is not only male and female, gender is not only woman and man and woman, and sexual orientation can have different varied connotations. So when we are talking about sex, sex does not only mean male or female sex, it only means certain ambiguous genitalia, which can be the result of certain genetic conditions. So sex is rather refers to the physical characteristics. And then we proceed on to the concept of gender, which is different from sex. So gender is something psychological or something which we internalize in our mind. A person's gender identity can range from being a man to a woman, or a person may not identify either as a man or a woman, or a person may identify both as a man or a woman or a different gender altogether in contradistinction of the sex in which the person was born. So here, as we can see, as I presented the gender spectrum, we can see that the gender spectrum, on one side there is a female and on the other side there is a male, and not only they are within the gender spectrum, but also all the persons within this range are also having a gender, and that is pertinently a very valid gender. A gender does not only mean to be a man or a woman. A gender also means anyone who comes within these categories of a man or a woman. So then coming on to the concept of gender, as we know that gender is a cisgender. Cisgender is cisgender is a person whose gender identity is the same as sex at birth. So a cis male or a cis female would be someone who's born as a male or a female, and in the mind also they are a male or a female in accordance with their physical sexual characteristics. So transgender is a person whose gender identity differs from the sex as birth. For instance, a person who is born as a male may perceive himself to be a female psychologically. So that is the concept of a transgender, where a person's gender identity does not coincide with what the person believes the person is. So then we have genderqueer or non-binary. A person's gender identity does not conform to the traditional binary gender paradigm, which means that a person may not, it is not necessary to be identified either as a man or a woman. So a person who does not want to identify as a man or a woman, it's perfectly fine, and it's a valid gender. So gender fluidity is a person who's gender fluid means a person whose gender identity is not fixed, but it can change with time and situation. And a person's gender expression would be how an individual wants to present himself or herself to the world. So a person's gender identity is what he or she chooses to be chooses to express. And now we talk about the gender reassignment surgery. Gender reassignment, sex reassignment surgery, as it was popularly called a few years back, but now it is known as gender affirmation procedures. So the views of, we don't use the word sex reassignment surgeries now, we use the word gender affirmation procedures as of now. So this is the distinction between sex and gender. Then we come to the concept of sexual orientation. A lot of people are very confused about sexual orientation of a transgender, for example. Like, for instance, a cis male can be both heterosexual and homosexual. Okay, a person can be both attracted to a man or a woman or both, right? So similarly, a trans person, be it a trans woman or a trans man, can also be attracted to a man or a woman or both. So here where the concept of sexuality or sexual orientation comes to play. A person can be heterosexual as someone who is attracted to a person of the opposite sex. A homosexual is someone who is attracted to a person of the same sex. Pansexual and asexual. Pansexual is someone who does not have any constraints in being attracted. The person is attracted to a person of all the genders. And asexual is the person who does not feel sexually attracted to anyone. So a person's gender is separate from sexual orientation, and one cannot be inferred from the other. So a person who is, for instance, a trans woman. So a trans woman, that person's gender identity is that of a woman, right? In spite of the fact the person is born as a man, the sex assigned at birth of a trans woman is that of a man, but the gender identity of a trans woman is that of a woman. So if the person is attracted to a male, that person is not a gay. Okay, so here when we are talking about a trans woman can also be heterosexual or homosexual or pansexual or asexual. So here we have to, similarly, in the case of a trans man, if a trans man is attracted to a female, the person will again be heterosexual and not a gay. So so this is a concept of sexual orientation, and mind you, sexual orientation does not depend on the gender of the gender identity that the person identifies with. So sexual behavior and sexual orientation can be two different, and sexual attraction can be two different things. A person might be sexually attracted, say for instance, a person might be sexually attracted to both male or female, but the person might exhibit their sexual behavior towards either male or a female. That is the person's choice, right? So this aspect I wanted to delve upon, to be clear about the concepts of sex, gender, and sexual orientation. I hope it is clear with the audience. And coming now slowly taking the things down towards the transgender person's rights aspects. So now, there has been a lot of activism in India relating to trans rights, and there had to be such activism looking at the international things going on at the international level. So one aspect is that we have to understand that India is a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Universal Declaration of Human Rights has aspects relating to the right to equality, has aspects relating to right to have a family, right to marriage. All these rights are included in the UDHR. And since India is also a signatory to the UDHR, it has to respect such rights of the Indian population. And not only that, the General Assembly of the United Nations, as well as the Security Council, has by and large, by its various resolutions, have exhibited its support, a very strong support towards the transgender community, and has been urging the nation states to develop policies, laws, and programs to help the trans community in general. So even the Constitution of India, the Constitution of India does not single out any particular person, but it says that all the fundamental rights, which includes the right to equality, also includes the fundamental rights, includes the right to equality, and right to equality is applicable to every citizen of the country. Right to equality means everyone is equal before law, and the law will equally protect everyone. So basically, there is no discrimination. Any kind of discrimination on the basis of either sex or gender is totally prohibited. And we all know about the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India in 2014, where one of the most celebrated judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court, where the center and the state governments were directed to grant legal recognition of the gender identity of male, female, and third gender. Reservation were directed to be made in the educational institutions and public appointments. And also, the Supreme Court called upon the government to address the problems being faced by the transgender community, such as gender dysphoria, social pressure, depression, suicidal tendencies, or social stigma. So, so basically, due to shortage of time, it's not practically possible to go through each and every provision of this act, but I have tried to cover the important areas of the act, which is important for any awareness generation program. So delving into the definition of the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. So before delving into the definition, we need to understand that the act, what is the purpose of the act? The purpose of the act was to provide equality to the trans persons and equality and social welfare to the trans persons so that the society can be socially inclusive. And also, this act cannot be given an interpretation which would defeat the very purpose of the purpose for which this act was enacted. So it means that if there is a question relating to interpretation in this act, every question relating to ambiguity or interpretations will be decided in accordance with the purpose of this act, which is to promote the welfare of the transgender persons. So transgender persons under the provisions of this act means a person whose gender does not match with the gender assigned to that person at birth. That includes trans men, trans women, persons with intersex variations, genderqueer, and persons having such socio-cultural identities like Hijra, Aravani, Jogta, and so on. So one important aspect of this definition is that not only does this definition apply to transgender, trans men, or trans women, but it very clearly says that whether or not the person has undergone sex reassignment surgery. So irrespective of the fact that any person has undergone sex reassignment surgery, that is hormone therapy or laser therapy or any person or any such other therapy, the person will be a transgender person and will be entitled to the protection under this act. So it is not necessary to have a certificate of recognition under this act. If a person identifies as a trans person, the person will have all the protection as mentioned in the act. I hope this is clear that this act is not dependent on getting the certificate of recognition under the provisions of this act. If you are discriminated by your employer, then you can launch a prosecution against the employer under this act, irrespective of the fact whether or not you have gone sex reassignment surgery. So means and includes, it means this definition is a very exhaustive definition. Transgender means and includes. It means that if there are other categories of people who will be slowly identified, who are very likely to be identified as a transgender, those categories of people will also come within the purview of the act. Now, when you are within the purview of the act, it means that you can launch a prosecution for discrimination. Now, this act, even though this is not a very strong piece of legislation, I would say, but it is indeed a weapon in the hands if used properly. You know, it is a weapon where you can use it. So we will see in the course of the discussion how we can use this act for the benefit of the transgender community. So So this, we will be discussing this act in rather three parts. One is the prohibition against discrimination and also the obligations of institutions, family, workplace, educational institutions. We'll see what are the discrimination that are prohibited and what are the obligations of these institutions, obligations of the family members towards a transgender person, obligation of the employers, obligation of the colleagues, obligation of the educational institutions towards a transgender person. What are the obligations? So prohibition against discrimination. This is the very first legislation in India that prohibits discrimination specifically against the transgender community, and it lays down the kinds of discrimination point-wise. So it under Section 3, it clearly states that no person or establishment shall discriminate against a transgender person on any of the following, namely, the denial or discontinuation or unfair treatment in educational establishments and services. It means that if you are denied admission in any educational institution, be it private or government, अगर आपको एडमिशन लेने से डिनाई किया जाता है, then you can launch a prosecution under this act. Then you can take the educational institution to court. And if you are unfairly treated means treating a transgender person not equal, not at par with the other people. So unfairly treating a transgender person in educational establishments will also lead to a discriminatory practice, and hence it is punishable. So unfairly treated in employment or occupation. Unfair treatment kaise hoga? For example, if there was an instance where a person had gone to give interview, a trans person had gone to give interview in for an administrative position in institute. So in that institute, the person was put through a psychological test to ascertain whether or not that person is mentally fit to do the assigned work. Now this is per se discrimination, because the HR department of that institution is not putting the other people to the same test, but putting the transgender person just because of the gender identity of that person to do a psychological test. So this is the example of being unfairly treated in an education, in your employment, or employment may, if you are denied promotion, if you are denied any kind of duty because of your gender identity, that is an unfair treatment. Denial of or termination from employment or occupation, it means that a person who goes to get gender affirmation procedures and comes back to the office, the person cannot be terminated from the service on the ground that the person has got gender affirmation procedures done. For instance, a person whose gender identity is that of a male but born as a female, joined an organization as a female, but after the entire gender affirmation procedure wants his identity to be revised as that of a male. So that person cannot be terminated from service, but there are employers who do that. The termination from employment on the ground of gender affirmation procedures is more common, but it is a discriminatory practice and it is punishable. So the denial or discontinuance of or unfair treatment in healthcare services. In healthcare services are those services that are available to the public in general. So in healthcare services also, you cannot be denied any kind of treatment just because of the gender identity of such and such person. So every service which is available to the public at large, be it goods, accommodation, service, facility, benefit, privilege, or opportunity, any kind of service that is related to to any of these aspects, if the transgender person is discriminated, then also it is illegal under the provisions of this act. Now, if any transgender person is restricted in the right to movement, if they are stated to confine themselves within a particular area, that is also a discrimination. Okay, so if you are unfairly treating any transgender person with respect to property, with respect to occupation of a property, if for instance a transgender person is harassed by the landlord, or if a transgender person is if a person is creating problems, a transgender person wants to purchase a property but not able to do that because of such and such discrimination, then also it will amount to a direct prohibition under section 3. So any kind of holding any kind of private or public office is also per se any discrimination in holding a private or public office is also per se a discrimination under the provisions of this act, and it is not legal. And if any person who has the care or custody of a transgender person, then that person also cannot be discriminated against. So basically, if you are a person who is engaged in any of these services. If you are a person who is an employer, if you are a person who who has an authoritative position in an educational institution, or if you are a person who is in the healthcare services, or if you are a person who is in any way related to provision of goods or accommodation, or providing any kind of service, facility, benefit, privilege, or opportunity, then this section and this act is applicable to you, and you are prohibited from discrimination against the transgender person. So next, so this is the aspect relating to discrimination, which is a very detailed section, and it can be used with respect to discrimination in all spheres, ranging from direct denial to unfair treatment in each and every aspect. So if you read the provisions very carefully, even a very small instance of discrimination is discrimination under the provision of this section. So coming since I have combined the act as well as the rules in order to present to you everything in a lucid and a very comprehensive way. So what are the obligations of the employers as given in Rule 13? So the employer has many obligations under the provisions of the 2019 Act, as well as under the provisions of the rules, under the 2020 rules. So what are the obligations of the employer? The employer has to provide a safe working environment, and it has to ensure that no transgender person is discriminated in any manner. Relating to infrastructure, infrastructure means for a very good set of infrastructure has to be created for the transgender person to enable them to join the workforce, which is rather a very important aspect of inclusivity. So infrastructure adjustments have to be made. They have to be trans friendly in terms of recruitment, in terms of employment benefits, in terms of promotion and other issues. So any aspect relating to employment, it is a responsibility of the employer to see that the trans person is not discriminated against. And also, they have to publish an equal opportunity policy for the transgender persons. The equal opportunity policy would be a policy which is generally an inclusive policy in their website of the company, and in other places of the company, in their recruitment notifications, for example, they have to publish that our company is trans friendly and we do not discriminate on the basis of such and such things, on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, and so on and so forth. So this has to be rather explicit, so that the trans community knows that they are also invited to join the workforce. So the equal opportunity policy of an establishment shall contain details of infrastructure facilities, measures of safety and security, and amenities to be provided to the transgender person to enable them to effectively discharge their duties in the establishment. Applicability of all rules and regulations of the company and the service conditions of the employees. Now, confidentiality of gender identity of the employees. And one important aspect is relating to the confidentiality clause. So the confidentiality clause, it is very important that the human rights, that the human resources department of the organization is sensitized to conduct interviews of the transgender community, to conduct recruitment drives of the transgender community. That sensitization has to be there. So once they know how to handle transgender applicants, they will know the right kind of questions to be asked in the interviews. They will know that they are supposed to keep the gender identity of the employees, of the transgender employees, to a very confidential extent. A lot of human resources department are engaged in the practice of telling each and every detail of the applicant to the immediate supervisor or to the immediate boss. Now, this practice is not proper when it comes to taking a transgender person in the workforce, because a transgender person might want to keep his or her identity as confidential and may not want to divulge it. So confidentiality has to be respected in the workforce. So another important aspect in establishments, the rules and the act say that in every establishment, there has to be a complaint officer to inquire and submit report within 15 days of receiving the complaint. So every establishment and every office has to have a complaint officer. The work of the complaint officer is to inquire and to submit a report within 15 days. And the head of the establishment has to take an action within 15 days. So uh, so the grievance redressal mechanism, it is the duty of the employer to have a very good grievance redressal mechanism in place to ensure that the transgender persons are not do not face any kind of harassment or any kind of problem during the course of their during the course of their work. So this is the aspect of that we have covered. We have covered the aspect of prohibition of discrimination. We have covered the obligations of establishments and obligations of the employers in general. And then now moving on to the obligations of the family members. So obligations of the family members, Section 12 talks about the right of residence of the transgender person. So no child shall be separated from parents or family member on being a transgender except on the order of a competent court in the interest of such a child. So being a transgender, it is very clearly laid out in this section that being a transgender, the family members cannot abandon a person on the ground that the person is a transgender. Okay, the family member cannot say that the doors of the house are closed because you have undergone gender affirmation procedure and you cannot no longer stay within the house. So that is a wrong practice. If the family members are of the opinion that they are not able to take care of the transgender person, the proper course of action in such a circumstance would be to file an application before the court, and the court will place the transgender person in a very dignified way in a nearest rehabilitation centers, or we have Garima Grahe these days for the benefit of the transgender community. So every transgender person, it is a right, their per se right to reside in their household. They cannot be excluded from the household, or they cannot be excluded from any part of the household. If the family members of a transgender person says that, you can only live within this part of the house, there is only one room and only this room you can access, you cannot come out, because if you come out the neighbors will see you and then the neighbor and hamari naak kat jayegi kyunki you are a transgender. That is not permitted under the provisions of this act. So it is the incumbent duty and responsibility of the family members not to abandon transgender persons. So there are also obligations of the educational institutions. Educational institutions should provide inclusive education to the transgender persons, and inclusive education in the sense of providing opportunities of sports, recreation, leisure activities to the trans persons without discrimination. And in sports, in such leisure activity, there have been cases where you segregate people on the basis of gender. So ladkiyan is line mein aa jao, ladke is line mein aa jao. So it is very clearly laid down that such kind of segregation is not allowed within the educational institution because it will amount to discrimination, as simple as that, because it is clearly written that equal opportunity has to be provided for everything within the educational institution. So such kind of segregation is not allowed. So government has to take steps to prohibit discrimination in any public organization, in any public or any private organization or public educational institutions, and such forth. So we have done what constitutes discrimination, and if interpreted properly and if understood properly, we come to know that a lot of things will directly or indirectly classify as discrimination under the provisions of this Act. So what all can you do in the case of if there is discrimination? So the first, you have to go step by step. So what all can you do if there is discrimination against a trans person, maybe in an educational institution, in the workplace, or in the immediate environment, or in any such places? So the first thing that you can do, that you can see if there is a transgender protection cell in your district. In some of the states, they have a transgender protection cell, which is under the district magistrate and the director general of police. And a complaints officer is there in every such, establishment. So you have to see that whether or not there is a transgender protection cell in the district. And then next, you can approach the National Council for Transgender Persons. The National Council for Transgender Persons is a council that has been made by the national government, and the body that takes care of the activities of the council is the NISD, the National Institute of Social Defense. So if you cannot present your complaint to the National Council for Transgender Person, you can very well put up your complaint you can mail the National Institute of Social Defense. You can do that. And you can check if there is any helpline or outreach centers available for the transgender persons. You can also do that. And another aspect, if you are facing discrimination in any educational institution, if a transgender person is harassed or discriminated or bullied in an educational institution, then the person can very well approach the UGC. The UGC has, under its relevant rules, has a provision for complaint, to take complaints of the transgender or of the students in general. So you can also complain to the University Grants Commission. And obviously, you can also launch a prosecution under the provisions of this particular act that we are talking about. We will see that in the offenses and penalties section, that what is the penalty for not following the provisions of this act. And also, in the worst cases where none of these things work and there is still discrimination, the final call is to file a writ petition before the High Court or the Supreme Court. But before filing the writ petition of the High Court or the Supreme Court, make sure that you have exhausted all these remedies, that you have tried your best to get your issue resolved through maybe putting up your complaint to a complaint officer or to the transgender protection cell or to the National Council, or through any other grievance redressal mechanisms. Okay, so so this was the part that related to the obligations of different institutions and the obligation of non-discrimination and the prohibition of non-discrimination per se. So next part, we'll be discussing about the identity documents and certificate of recognition. Identity documents and certificate of recognition. So we have to understand very briefly, I have, put it up that there are two kinds of certificates that, but then please be sure that getting a certificate of recognition under the provisions of this act is not what you say is not important. You may or may not want to get the certificate of recognition, but that doesn't mean that you are not within the protection granted under the act. So getting the identity documents is the choice of the transgender person. There are two types of certificates of identity: as a transgender person or for gender change. So you can get your certificate of identity either as a transgender person or either for change of gender. But yes, if you want to get your all your official documents changed in your desired gender, or if you want to get your name changed in the official documents, then you have to proceed in accordance with the act. Okay, so there are certain benefits of getting certificates in accordance with the act that will enable you to further your gender affirmation procedures in terms of getting your official documents changed. So if a transgender person is above 18 years of age, the transgender person can himself apply. Or if the parent or the guardian of the transgender person can apply if the person is below 18 years of age. So committee a child welfare committee can also apply for getting the identity certificate of the transgender if the child is in need and protection. If the child is basically comes under the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act. So a child who is abandoned or has run away from home or has certain issues, then the child is placed under the direction of the Child Welfare Committee, and the Child Welfare Committee can also apply. So government has to take measures to facilitate submission of application in remote or disadvantaged areas. Now we have the online portal where we can apply and we can get the certificate of identity for a transgender person or for a change of identity document for change of gender. So if we see what are the requirements for certificate of identity as a transgender person, there you need to fill up a form which is an you need to fill up an application which is in form number 1, and then there has to be an affidavit that has to be gone along with it. It has to be notarized, so application form attached along with the affidavit. Then you have to submit the self-attested copies like date of birth certificate, Aadhaar card or PAN card or voter ID or whatever you have, along with your recent passport size photograph. And that has to be submitted to the district magistrate where you are residing. Okay, so that if that cannot be submitted to a place where you are not residing, because then it will be returned due to lack of jurisdiction. The district magistrate who is reside at the very place where the applicant is residing is under a duty to give the certificates. So no physical or medical screening of the applicant is done. There cannot be any police officer who's coming to your door and asking for physical screening or medical screening. So that is illegal. But the correctness of the particulars in your form can be verified. But there shouldn't be any kind of physical or medical screening for the purpose of getting a certificate of identity for a transgender person. So this is a requirement for certificate of identity as a transgender person, and there is a different the requirement for certificate of change of gender. So for change of gender or a revised certificate, the procedure is the same. You have to fill the application form in form number 1 and an affidavit for residence proof. And you also have to submit a certificate of medical intervention that is issued by the chief medical officer. So the definition of medical intervention means any gender affirming medical intervention. Medical intervention means any kind of gender affirming medical intervention. So any kind of medical intervention. Please note that it is not only a surgical intervention. Any kind of gender affirming medical intervention can also include just intervention by way of gender identity certificate. आप certificate भी दिखा दोगे तब भी आपके पास जेंडर चेंज के लिए सर्टिफिकेट आ जाएगा. Then you have to submit self-attested copies of date of birth, Aadhaar card, PAN card, or whatever is available. And you have to submit any certificate of identity or identity card issued along with recent passport size photograph. And again, you have to submit it to the district magistrate. And again, no physical examination or no police verification can be done. So these are the information that has to be given in the application form number 1, name and gender, both the existing and preferred, date of birth, education qualifications, residential address, annual income, possession of other identity documents, medical history if you're applying for change in gender certificates, confidentiality, preserved except for central or state security agencies or other agencies as prescribed by law, and for statistical and so confidentiality, whatever information you are giving for getting the certificate of identity, that information is preserved and made confidential, but it can only be utilized by the central or the state government security agencies, or it can be used for any kind of statistical or for policy making purposes. Your personal details will not be used for any other purposes as such. So once you fill up the form for your gender identity certificate, what do you get? You get a certificate of identity as a transgender person in form 3, or for a certificate of identity for change of gender, that is in either male or female. Then you'll also get an identity card. So the time limit is 30 days for receiving of an application along with the affidavit. So within a period of 15 days, you have to get the certificate of change of gender identity. So now there are several cases where the certificate is not granted. If the certificate is not granted, you have to see that maybe some or the other, there must have been some or the other mistake by your end. Some of the certificate may not have been in place, or you may have given the you may have posted your application forms to the district magistrate of a different area. So that is majorly the reason why a number of certificates are not granted. But if a certificate is not granted, then the reason for rejection is duly communicated to the person, and the applicant may also seek review of its decision of the district magistrate within 60 days of rejection. So if your certificate is not granted, then you can also file an appeal against the order of the district magistrate. And even after filing an appeal, if the certificate is still not granted, then you can approach the High Court of that particular state. And actually the proper course is that if the certificate of identity is not granted, like stated in the section, it is better to pay a visit to the office of the district magistrate and to put up an application then and there. You should go and personally, it is better to do things that way. So instead of all of a sudden filing a writ petition in the High Court, you should personally go to the district magistrate's office and ask why the certificate was not granted. And there have been several cases where the certificate was not granted, but when the person paid a personal visit to the office of the district magistrate, it was granted there. So once you have got the certificate of identity, these are the official documents where you can change your name and gender within a period of 15 days. Within a period of 15 days, after getting the certificate of identity or the certificate of gender change, you can get your name and gender changed in all these documents. Now, the problem comes here. A lot of people have managed to get their certificate of identities, but they are not able to change their names or their name or gender when they approach the designated authorities. So there is a very big problem with respect to this aspect, because you cannot change your name in the official documents, like your college certificates, for instance. You have to approach to the UGC. The UGC tells you to approach to the CBSE, where you have completed your board exam. So then you are just wandering from pillar to post and without any remedy. So the Delhi High Court has recently, asked the CBSE to give an explanation with respect to this aspect, that why the problem is this act is not being implemented in the true spirit, and it is not being taken very seriously by the authorities. So if something is not being taken seriously by the authorities, the activism has to be at a level where it has to be taken. It has to come to the notice of the district administration that there is such and such act, and they are incumbent and under a duty to adhere to the provisions of this act. So even though the official documents, there is a very clear-cut provision under the act that all the official documents have to be can be changed, but still these are not changed as per the recent scenario. But then you can always go to the office of the district administration, put up an application, put up a copy of the act, underline the provision of the act where it says that it is mandatory, and bring it to their notice. So when anyone says, oh acha aise bhi karna hai, oh acha varna it is a punishable offense, then they will do it. So you have to fight for it, basically. So then we come to the last part, which is the offenses and penalties section. The offenses and penalties section is very clear under the provisions of this act. It is section 18. The offenses and penalties section is compelling a transgender to do forced labor or bonded labor, denying the right of passage, access to public services, forcing to leave a household, village, or place of residence, or harming, injuring, endangering life, safety, health, well-being, mental or physical. So any kind of abuse and any kind of harming or injuring the safety or well-being of the transgender person is punishable from 6 months to 2 years of imprisonment and fine. So you can launch a prosecution under the provisions of this act. So if an offense, now how do you launch a prosecution? If an offense is committed, you either report it to the police, or you start proceedings. If the police will refuse to file an FIR under this act, which it will always refuse, because it is India. So in India, the police generally refuses to file FIRs. So if the police refuses to file an FIR, then you can start proceedings before the court in your district, or you can go to the grievance redressal mechanism as set up by the government, which is the National Council for Transgender, and other grievance redressal mechanisms as such. So I think this is the end of the slide. So I have discussed the act in a very lucid way so that uh, a little bit understanding is reached regarding the provisions of this act. And if there are any questions or any clarifications, please feel free to ask me.
That was lovely, Aisha. Like you have done it such a, in a nice systematic manner. So we
Thank you.
know, like, where and what, where to go, what to do, when to do, and how to do.
Yeah.
But then let's come back to reality. This is India,
Hmm.
and we have all the laws,
Hmm. Hmm.
we have everything. And then let me give you an example. Uh, if I am a minor,
Hmm.
because usually when we understand about our gender is during the phase of our puberty, we are still minor and we are always under the protection of our parents.
Hmm.
And if we are in rural India, the parents are too scared to accept the child the way they are.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not like they don't like their child suddenly. You can't not like your child one fine day, but they're too scared of the society to accept the child the way they are.
Hmm.
So, from where do I start? How do I get help?
Hmm.
And you cannot touch a child without the parents' permission if you're in India. And where does the child go? Like, from where does the child start?
See, with respect to children and the relationship of children with their parents, uh, there is no such more powerful thing than a dialogue. Okay, that is the only way to start something and the only way to end something. So, the only thing that you can do at such a moment is to start a dialogue. Dialogue has to be started not in a very "Oh, आप क्या कर रहे हो ऐसे क्यों कर रहे हो," not like that. It has to be started at a to make sure that you bring the other person at your level. Okay, you have to bring down the level of the person and then have a dialogue. It depends on your skill, you know. There is a skill, communication skill, where you present things which are primarily offensive in a very buttery way. Okay, so like I said, in the provisions of the act, there are obligations of the family members as well. The family members should not be discriminating against a transgender person. So, this fact has to be highlighted before the parents. Okay. So, you have to tell the parents that there are many children in India who feel the same like your child feels. And there is also a law with respect to such children, and the law says this. So when you explain to them this, I am sure no parent will refuse and say that no, there is there we do not believe you. So it depends on how you try to talk to the parents. And also one very important weapon that you have is the section of offenses and penalties under section 18. So it says that if you are not following the provisions of this act, then you can be prosecuted. That is a very, very important weapon. So even if no anybody does not launch a prosecution, but you have to create the fear of prosecution, then only you will be able to get things out. So ladna padega basically. So
Okay. Yeah, I get it. So we are talking about children who are in a position to talk, convince, communicate.
hmm,
Uh, you can talk to your parents, considering the parents are educated
hmm,
and they
hmm,
understand their stance. Sometimes this doesn't work,
hmm,
right? They're too adherent, too stubborn. So, what can a child do in that case? Can they ask NGOs to help them? Because being a minor, they will not be able to, I think, directly go and launch the report, make no,
hmm,
make a FIR or like go out there directly because they are too scared at the time, or like they too are going through a phase. which is very something different for them. So, when do you think can NGOs help them, like who are working,
Uh,
like, staying in the legality
yes.
of the entire
Mm.
system?
The
If
role
it's a
of,
minor,
yeah, I do understand what you are saying, that at the end, these things, especially in a country like India, where people are not really afraid of the law. So, where does the child go? I do understand that the position of the child is in a very precarious condition. And the role of the NGO should be to help the child navigate the internal conflicts. The role of the NGO should be just be able to sort out the child. Okay, this is what you think, this is what you want. Okay. And the aim of the NGO should be to not to कि जाओ जाके कोर्ट में जाओ, prosecution launch कर दो, not like that. It should be to uh, tell the child that now you are young, you concentrate on your studies, you stand on your own feet, and then maybe we can do something about it. Okay, so the role of the NGO should be try to ease the mental trauma that the child is facing because of facing the sexuality and the gender identity related issues. Children have a lot of questions in mind. Why am I like this? Why मेरे साथ ये ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है? मेरे parents क्यों नहीं समझ रहे हैं? So the role of the NGO should be to address those questions first and tell the child that now it is the time for you to study, to be independent. So once you are financially independent, you can do whatever you want. A lot of transgender people are highly educated, and they have managed to struggle, and they have managed to get into very good positions in the society. So it is very important for the NGO to foster such children so that they can grow up and become voice for the community. So it has to be the energies should be concentrated on that aspect, if not in the legal way, by counseling and by helping the child understand his own self. So that is what I
okay,
think
so you're
should be done.
basically, yes, so you're basically saying like first to try convince the parents,
Hmm.
and if that works, it's good. If it doesn't work, the child should lay low till the person does not become self-sufficient
Yes.
so that he can make her own stand. Okay,
Yes.
okay, that is fair enough. So sometimes it becomes something about your life and death. For example, uh, it would not be wrong to say sometimes in India they will like take you to a doctor, put you on sedatives, or might even take you to a religious person to do some traditional offerings or prayers which might bring back your orientation, such kind of things. And then there can be repeated mental abuse, like I have given birth to a son, I did not stand up for this, how come you're a girl now? So in that is like continuous, and then it pushes a child to the like a phase wherein the child is too depressed and like too disheartened to live a life. So
Hmm.
when such situations sometimes come in, how do you think NGOs can help? Because we can't touch the child or help the child from
Hmm.
outside. Is there a law? I'm just asking about like, the different
Uh,
scenarios in which we also
actually,
have to
the
work.
Actually, the problem in India is that, in spite of having so many laws in place for the vulnerable sections of the community, in extreme cases like the ones that you have mentioned, such laws don't really work. Okay, in certain cases. But if if it comes, like you said, as a life and death situation, then maybe the NGO can take things in their own hands. If it is a situation where the life of the child is severely affected, then the NGO can file an application in the competent court, stating that the family members are unable to take care of the child, and the court will very rightfully place the child in a rehabilitation center. Okay, so these cases which you are talking about is cases where the child is completely unable to live with the parents. Okay, because of
Right.
physical, mental abuse and such abuse of a very high degree that cannot be ignored. So then, in that case, the NGO is well within its, powers to file an application before the court. And I think in rare cases, it should be done where the life of the child
Okay.
is at
Okay.
stake. Hmm.
Even if the child is a minor, an NGO can file,
Yes. Yes.
on behalf of the.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Very
Does the
rightfully.
child need to consent, or do the child need to consent or give a written consent to the NGO, or like, how does it work?
Yes, the child will have to give a written consent.
Even if he or she is a minor.
Yes, yes. When the child is a
Okay.
minor,
Okay.
you will be filing the application to the court as a friend, next friend of the minor. So the
Okay.
minor has to give you consent along with the consent letter. Then you can file the application to the court along with the relevant whatever is required, all the documents,
Okay.
all the evidence of threatening of life, and you have to make out a case, and then the minor can be put in rehabilitation centers. And there is also garima grahe, which is established all over India
Yes.
now, so you can also take their help and place the child in a safe place.
Okay.
Mm.
Thank you so much. That was so much of information. It's really insightful. And for all of you who are listening to us today, I hope if you are going through, into any of such situations, you can take help from the session today. And at any point of time, you can always, Anajari is always there for people to help people going through this. So going through any difficult phase of your life. So thank you so much, Aisha. It was lovely talking to
Thank you
you.
so
Really an
much.
insightful session.
Thank you
Thank
so
you. Thank
much.
you. Thank you.